I'm Stephen Anderson, a rancher, farmer from the beautiful, pristine Flint Hills of Eastern, and my heart aches at what's happening to our nation. We are being engulfed in an economic Katrina. My fellow senior citizens' values in life and our life savings are being obliterated alike. The hopes, the dreams, the jobs, and the future of our youth are being martyred on the cross of globalism. Our baby boomers' plans for retirement and well-deserved rest and leisure are being blown asunder in a hurricane of pension fund failures. And to that vast middle class who go to work every day and every night, keeping our economy and our nation moving forward, how are you going to heat your homes, feed and clothe your family, fuel your car in this smog of pink slips that's enshrouding our workplaces? We all face that same blizzard of printing press money that's devaluing our savings, our homes, our investments, but mostly, drastically, our take-home pay. To you, my fellow countrymen, I say, wake up. Our nation, your nation, is at risk. It's in imminent danger. We are witnessing the most rapid concentration of global wealth in world history. How much money is enough for any one individual? Last year, Forbes magazine editorialized on how great our economy was. And the evidence used to substantiate that claim was that the number of billionaires had increased 19% over the previous year. Free trade has spawned a cesspool of over 793 billionaires. And I've written a poem to address this nightmare. It goes something like this. How many broken hearts and shattered dreams, empty communities and polluted streams? How many bankruptcies, farm and home foreclosures, starving children and boarded up church doors? How many suicides and kids smoking dope? And how many families who've lost all hope does it take to create just one billionaire? This is an epochal economic era. And how we react, will we stay the course to disaster, or will we rise up en masse demanding substantive realignment in the economic and foreign policy thinking? I want to take you back in time to a memorable childhood experience. It was the first day of school. Bell rang. We'd all lined up to be signed our desks. Small kids down front and us bigger ones in the back. The flag salute, and then we were seated. In huge capital letters across the blackboard, Mr. Shaw wrote T-H-I-N-K. Think. He said, I'm here to teach you all about the absolutes, the 3 R's, science and history. But he said, throughout your life, you'll be faced with problems you'll need to solve on your own, unless you just want to follow the herd over the cliff. He told us kids, study these issues, study them from all angles, think them through, and then always march to your own drummer. Mr. Shaw was a wise man. And I didn't come here today to tell you how to think, but I'm here today begging people across our nation to start thinking, to think for yourselves and refuse to accept or believe that ration of daily self-serving propaganda emanating from that coterie of witless wonders professing to represent us in national and state governments. My grandpa taught me a poem when I was a small child, and it goes something like this. The human race is a funny lot, and sometimes act as humans not. Their greed for money and the power to rule make them a rascal and a fool. friends, for too long we have allowed the rascals and the fools to run our nation. We've been putting little crooks in orange suits and sending them to prison, while putting the big crooks in pinstripe suits and sending them to Washington. Amen. To those effeminate elite meeting here at this convention center, and to their peers who met out in Denver, Colorado last week, I'm here to say, you don't have a clue. You've dropped the ball. You're greedy, you're corrupt, you're ill-informed, and you're out of touch. And you know less about the everyday struggles of most Americans to make ends meet than a tomcat knows about baking gingerbread. And you don't care. After all of the public outcry over earmarks, you've reacted like pigs at a trough, and you add 10,000 new earmarks worth $20 billion as slop for your re-election campaign. As politicians, you have morphed into putrid purveyors of parsimonious pomposity who posture, pose, preen, pretend, pontificate, and prevaricate. You can be replaced, and you should be replaced for the good of our nation. The Macedonian, the Egyptian, the Grecian, the Roman, all of the previous great empires throughout history have risen to pinnacles of economic and military might, and then they disintegrated because their leaders became corrupt and rotten to the core. I'd say, give me a Ross Perot who clearly and succinctly predicted the economic downfalls of NAFTA and free trade and its economic destruction of America. Give me a Ron Paul who wants to return to our constitutional form of government and honest money. Give me a Jesse Ventura, a Bob Barr, a Ralph Nader, a Dennis Kucinich. Men who tell the honest truth from their hearts and refuse to compromise their principles for politics. Give me Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur from Ohio, an honest, caring woman whose heart encompasses all humanity. Or even give me a James Trafficant from prison, whose only sin was standing before the cameras on CNN revealing the truth. But better yet, allow me to interview ordinary people on the streets of St. Paul. And I'll find you some women and I'll find you some men who have plain old common sense, the moral integrity to resist the bribery and the corruption emanating from K Street, and enough backbone to do the right thing for our nation and its populace. I consider myself a fiscal conservative, and for 6 generations my family considered Republicans and conservatives as synonymous. Well, in the year 2000, we put those conservative Republicans in complete control. President, Senate, House, 7 of the 9 Supreme Court justices. And what did we get in return? We got 4 raises in the debt ceiling from $4.5 to $9 trillion. Think about that, as much debt in 6 years as we'd incurred in our previous entire nation's history. That's conservative. We had missing $100 bills in Iraq, measured by the ton, and even the plane load. That hardly seems conservative to me. No bid contracts exceeding $260 billion, and a global trade deficit that defies mathematics, common sense, and even a liberal's comprehension. We got an insane push to merge the United States and Canada and Mexico into the North American Union, and to build them a superhighway from Walmart and China. If anyone still equates Republicans with fiscal conservatism, then I'll sit down and shut up.
Amen.
But they aren't, and I won't. Whatever problems we face in our individual lives today, they all pale in comparison to the threat posed by the compulsive, criminally corrupt corporate capitalism and our individual rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have been hijacked by corporate contracts, corporate monopolies, corporations' right to compete, and our nation's sovereignty has been rejected and replaced with free trade treaties. I wrote a poem to commemorate our free trade inheritance, and it goes a little like this. It's called July the 4th, Dependence Day 2008. What proud, foolish people in the whole US of A. We naively celebrate our Dependence Day. With gay backyard picnics, we all attend a parade. Our Independence Day celebration has become a charade. Now we're totally dependent on far foreign oil with $4 gas and obscene profits for ExxonMobil. Our bravest young soldiers continue to die so Halliburton's profits can soar to the sky. Mutilated bodies, now 45,000 strong. The war keeps getting funded. The decider can do no wrong. We're dependent on slave labor for the clothes on our backs. All our electronics now exempt from U.S. import tax. We're totally dependent for the shoes on our feet, and we're the world's largest importer of good old foreign red meat. We depend on illegal cheap labor from old Mexico and on that flood of illegal drugs that continues to flow. We depend on Japan and China to fund our trillions of debt. Congress will keep raising it. It's a safely won bet. We're dependent on government for every petty need. It's almost as infectious as the raw corporate greed. China put lead in our kids' toys, mercury in our seniors' drugs. We'll soon be dependent on some China to give us our goodnight hugs. We're dependent on Chile for our roses and grapes, and upon Singapore for our new computer tapes. Shirts from Malaysia, our pants from Bangladesh, even though buttons and their holes seldom ever mesh. We're dependent on imported E. coli tomatoes. FDA won't tell us where or why, but importing our food drives the prices sky high. We depend on credit card to keep us poor folks afloat, yet Bush antes up billions for the rich bankers in Bear Stearns' sinking boat. We're dependent upon NAFTA, CAFTA, and the WTO until our economy receives the ultimate death blow. Imported firecrackers sure lit up the sky. A totally dependent society, yet no one questions why. Kind of a sad way to celebrate the 4th of July. Well, today, September the 1st, is Labor Day, 2008, and I say God bless every woman, man, or child that puts in an honest day's work. But you're appreciated less and treated worse today than at any point in time since the days of the great robber barons of our past. Job security and a living wage have become dirty words in the halls of Congress and in the corporate boardrooms. The biblical injunction that every laborer is worthy of his hire is being ignored by Christian and atheist alike. Honest, laboring men and women have become more excess resources. They're being abandoned in favor of the more easily victimized slave labor in third world countries. Were it possible to argue with ignorance, I'd point out that annihilating millions of high-pay manufacturing jobs in the United States has delivered a knockout blow to our Social Security and Medicare. It's simple third-grade economics, incomprehensible to these free traders. If you have no jobs, then you don't have any paychecks. If you don't have these paychecks, you have no withholding for Social Security and income tax or in health care. The laboring people in this country must lead a revolution to restore honest government, honest wages, and honest jobs. Anything else will be economic disaster. Without unions, we all become helpless eunuchs in a harem of corporate monopolies. In 1992, Ross Perot spent millions of his own money trying to warn us that free trade, as envisioned by the NAFTA Accords, would be an economic disaster. Remember that? Ross said free trade would create a great sucking sound of manufacturing jobs leaving this country. And he was right, wasn't he? The United States manufacturing base has been gutted. It's on the ropes. It's virtually destroyed, from the steel, tool and die industries right down to the clothes we wear and the products we use on a daily basis. And what's been our legacy of this free trade fiasco? Well, try a $6.5 trillion trade deficit for starters. Of course, we'll pass that on to our grandchildren, won't we? And what about the pink slips, the lost homes, the heartache of being 50 years old and taking 2 service sector jobs that pay half your old manufacturing one? The inner city blight and the mayors attempting to cope with the pain of entire industries leaving town. But not just leaving town, but receiving government incentives, government tax breaks to relocate in third world countries. Let me tell you, our nation is at war, but it's not a war against terrorism and Al-Qaeda. It's not a war against drugs and crime. It's not a war against poverty and illiteracy, but it's a war against our national economy and our nation's standard of living. And this is one war that government is winning. Don't get me wrong, I believe in trade. Our nation was born to trade. First it was furs, tobacco, and cotton, then eventually every manufactured product imaginable. It's in our blood to trade. As children, we traded toys and baseball cards. Later on, cars and guns or coins. One thing we quickly learned, if we were cheated, we didn't trade with that person again. For some reason, our government never learns. Our Congress continues to repeat the same mistake over and over. Most favored nation status for communist China has garnered us poison our children's toys, our seniors' drugs, and in our pets' food. There are billions of dollars worth of our national debt, though, guarantees their impunity. And all of our politicians' bellicose brain is merely campaign rhetoric. Politicians need not care because their salaries never recede. Don't they enjoy exclusive health care and obscene pensions for life, much like the potentates of past centuries, or perhaps like the swine in George Orwell's Animal Farm? We received NAFTA courtesy of a Democrat president and a Republican Congress. Isn't it amazing how those guys can work in bipartisan harmony when their corporate masters tell them to? Free trade also drove 40 million illegals into the United States. We can shed American blood and spend American dollars in over 140 countries around the world protecting borders, but we can't protect our own. What can we say, or what should we say or do about this massive human migration? First, I say we not blame the victims. Does anyone sane believe this mass of humanity left family and friends, home and church, village and nation, except in desperation? A huge glut of NAFTA-induced below cost of production United States agricultural products were dumped on Mexican markets, and it destroyed millions of subsistence farmers' livelihood and lives. Yet we cannot, we dare not accept all of the free trade-induced refugees in the world, lest we too become poverty-stricken and starving. But we can and we should rethink free trade. Creating a larger cesspool of global billionaires must be abandoned in favor of strengthening local economies around the entire world. Free trade has not just destroyed jobs and lowered wages in our nation, but it has exploited humanity and driven millions into poverty and starvation on a global basis. Our nation has created a new god, it's money, and a new religion, it's greed. To comprehend where we stand here in the 21st century, we need first to ponder our own history a little bit. The ancestors of most residents of the Great Plains and the Midwest had fled an oligarchical system of European slavery called peasantization. And in their quest for freedom and the right to own land, they endured unimaginable hardships. They shed gallons of sweat, tears, and blood. They buried innumerable loved ones, but with a primitive technology, axe, hoe, pitchfork, milk stools, cream separators, slop buckets, with their very bare hands, their raw courage and unquenchable perseverance, they built an unequaled, dynamic powerhouse of a nation. We need to discuss, debate, and understand the insatiable greed, lust for power, and the evil omnipotence of today's corporate structure, and how the plutocrats threaten to steal all those blessings of life that our grandparents sacrificed so much to bequeath to us. Do any of you remember the 1952 CED report? The Committee for Economic Development consisted of some 250 economists. They were the business elite and the government bureaucrats who conceived the adaptive program for agriculture. These were people who didn't know the difference between apple pies and cow pies, and they set themselves up as semi-gods to determine the future of United States agricultural policy and of farmers' fate. The single most oft-repeated phrase in the CED report was, and I quote, "the necessity to remove excess resources, primarily people, as rapidly as possible from agriculture." Well, when we became excess resources, we became just like our peasant ancestors. And since 1952, farm bills, banks lending or foreclosing, and ag research were all carefully crafted to regulate this exodus from the heartland. Unfortunately, millions of men and women working in America's factories and manufacturing sector became expendable victims of this same insane economics and this mad science as the four horsemen of our nation's economic apocalypse, GATT, NAFTA, WTO, and CAFTA, were adopted. This globalization may well have created billionaires, those bloviating buffoons of belligerent bigotry and the billious blowhards in the business world, but its consequences in small rural communities has been sheer devastation worldwide. Gatt introduced the evil omnipotency of the corporate global gangsters, and it was the El Nino blowing the shame and the heartbreak of lost jobs, of bankruptcy, foreclosure, and suicide like tornadoes through the heartland in the 1980s. NAFTA was the serial killer of manufacturing jobs and family farms, and it brought a tsunami-like tidal wave of corporate slave labor-produced imports into our nation. And WTO is the E. coli infecting the globe with greed. Trade negotiators who know less about working folks' economics than a bullfrog knows about playing hopscotch meet like piranhas at a feeding frenzy. And these glib gurus of regurgitated gibberish re-chew the same worn-out cud, and they belch up the same noxious solutions. Open new markets. We'll open up all of the markets in the world, and I'm still forced to sell my products to the same great grain and meat monopolies. In this winter steal-all society of kleptoparasites, I'm captive to the crooked, corrupt corporate chicanery and their preposterous, pernicious, perverted ideas of free trade. The people writing our trade bills are no more qualified than an ass is to play in an accordion. Let's not fail to examine the new axis of evil. Our land-grant college system, the Chicago Board of Trade, and the Federal Reserve, whose tentacles attempt to strangle every vestige of private ownership left in America. President Lincoln had charged the land-grant system with fostering a healthy and a prosperous rural landscape. Need I ask if we're either healthy or prosperous? Like an army of Hitler-esque myrmidons, this gaggle of garrulous goons all chant the same useless corporate rhetoric. Bigger is better. Maximize, optimize, get more efficient. KLA's new Cargill president used the phrase, "get more efficient," nearly a dozen times in just one brief interview at the cattle industry's annual meeting. And in his best vacuous hyperbole, he artfully straddled the line between preposterous lunacy and believable absurdity when warning that the cow-calf producers of America should be prepared to absorb the cost of $5 corn. Well, the new Farm Bill, minus the Packer feeding ban and the competition reform, gives them the power to deliver on that promise, on that threat. And I wrote a poem to address the new Farm Bill of 2008, and it goes something like this. Congress was bought, the Senate was paid, America's farmers and ranchers just got Ken laid. The Packers are big, the Packers are mean, they just bought themselves a political machine. Peterson, Baucus, and even my Jerry Moran sold their soul for cold cash, eliminating the Packer feeding ban. The Chicago Board of Trade is a mighty handy place to rob us old ranchers without even saying grace. When the Packers say sell, the feds join in. Limit down's a situation where no cattle feeder can win. Gamblers sell cattle they don't own, that don't even exist. Our ranchers' only salvation will be to delist. They keep selling short till they wreck ranchers' true price. Their evil as sin are just like blood-sucking lice. These Packers bought them some professors. Even the NCBA said, "You better sing our song or we'll cut short your pay." The NCBA got excited and pulled out all the stops, flew this huge delegation to Washington to stand around as Packer props. Scared the hell out of their members, said prices will go down. Looks like NBCA's Terry Stokes is the new Packers clown. Some join this Packers monopoly through ignorance or greed. Makes you speculate they've been smoking that wild flowery weed. Some folks don't understand, and they'll even deny the price depressing effects of captive supply. The entire farm bill is a humiliating joke designed for packers to let ranchers go broke. We'll grow cheaper cattle and we'll grow cheaper feed, because nothing will quench the monopolistic corporate greed. There's no such thing as global free trade. It's our government protecting the corporate pirates to raid. The stakes are enormous with the players, mostly small, but with congressional assistance, the Packers will own it all. It's a mad race to despotism, and Congress caved in. They sold out freedom-loving Americans to ensure their next election win. You know, the land-grant college system has been willing co-conspiracy by providing the globalists this cover of sound science. And one of the terrible consequences is that for the first time in world history, there is a threat to food safety for every person on this planet. Every concoction from the devil's own pantry is fed to, it's injected in, or it's sprayed on crops and livestock worldwide. Then it's harvested and shipped globally. I ask, how can these witch doctors of sound science so righteously declare that cloned meat, GMOs, BT corn, biotechnology, BST milk, it's all safe? Yet they're unable to explain the explosion of Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or asthma or attention deficit disorder or diabetes, or that deathly hand of cancer that's reached out and embraced every family in our nation. You know, today the classic example of sound science is their proposal for the radiation of poultry and ground beef to suppress E. coli. No attempt for greater cleanliness. Hell no, sterilist fecal contamination. That's optimized efficiency in the corporate world. Well, let me tell you something. Irradiated manure is still manure. You can eat it if you want to. And don't ever forget, sound science once considered it heresy to dare question the world being flat, didn't they? And they treated sick and weak people with leeches to drain more of their precious blood. Well, the Federal Reserve is also a privately owned corporation that was created in 1913, and it usurped Congress' constitutionally mandated responsibility to coin money and regulate its value. Since 911 has become the excuse, or at least a scapegoat, for everything in the midst of America, from the stock market woes to your latest bout with indigestion, I'd like to share an amazing revelation from a report that the 10th District Fed released. And I'm going to quote from it. It was the Economic Review, 4th quarter 2001, volume 86, number 4. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City sponsored a symposium. It was labeled the Economic Policy for the Information Economy at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, August 30th through September 1st, 2001. This symposium brought together a distinguished group of academics, central bankers, and financial market experts to examine how the information economy will alter the structure of economic activity. The symposium also served as a forum for addressing key policy changes. Professor J. Bradford DeLong, University of California, Berkeley, and Harvard President Lawrence H. Summers suggested that any attempt to analyze the meaning and importance of the new economy must grapple with 4 questions. Well, I'm going to skip the first 3 and address the 4th, and I quote again, and 4th, how will the American economy respond to the shock to the public confidence and the destruction caused by the terror attacks of September the 11th? Now, these Fed officials may well describe themselves as distinguished, as knowledgeable, and even brilliant, but I'd more aptly suggest that they were psychic seers of Merlin-like magic, employing chicken entrails and crystal balls to enable them the ability to discuss public reaction to 9/11 on August 30th, 31st, and September the 1st, 10 days before the attack occurred. This come out of their own book. And of course, this same Fed ruthlessly promotes and supports free trade globally. Free trade, the mother of all economic degeneracy, and a ruthless corporate gangbang of the most deprived and vulnerable human beings on earth. My own farm leaders hypnotize themselves with verbal flatulence and innately insane ideas. They competitively whine for safety nets that more accurately reflect bungee cords wrapped around their necks. They hold an annual day to brag about how cheap food is, and then they vow to become ever more efficient. My ag leaders, in a syphilitic-like reaction, blindly accept overproduction as the legitimate excuse for lower prices. When was the last time you heard a farm leader, or the ag media, or the ag press challenge this ludicrous lie? The truth is, every other industry in America or profession rewards extra production, from the CEOs down to factory floors, from Wall Street to Main Street. Exceeding quota is being rewarded. It's not penalized. Think about it. Think of even the CEOs' bonuses, even in these failing corporations as they float into bankruptcy. My ancestors used to consider an abundance of food a blessing and a gift from Almighty God, and I would ask, how can a nation honestly have a surplus of God's blessings? We must stop electing leaders based on the length of their tongues and the breadth of their mouths. I have a dear friend, Lawrence Liebel. He's 87 years old, from Claflin, Kansas, and he was a World War II veteran of the European theater. We visited recently, and with tears sliding down his cheeks, he said, "Steve, everything my generation fought and died for is being destroyed. The respect and trust America enjoyed worldwide has turned to fear and turned to hatred." He said, "Steve, I won't be around much longer. Us old World War II vets are dying off, 900 a day. But," he said, "I'm kind of glad, because I don't want to witness the suffering that my family will face if things don't change." And his words prompt me to speak a little bit about Iraq. You know, the Vietnam-era draft dodgers who orchestrated the invasion of Iraq have provided an ever-shifting set of reasons as to why. 9/11, weapons of mass destruction, harboring terrorists, restoring democracy, an endless list of lies that ever change but never cease. We subverted international law. We built secret prisons. We made secret arrests. We committed secret torture. And we created a more dangerous world, all under the guise of national security. And no one has ever been held accountable.
That's right.
I had hoped No, I had sincerely expected things to change when the Democrats regained control of Congress 2 years ago. Well, there was no such luck, and there was no change. Why not? It seems to me that the same virtuous, narcissistic, incompetent, malicious criminals are still in charge of this country. Congress holds hearings, and the Pat Tillman family clearly testified how our government lied, to the family, lied to the public, lied to the world, and did it right up to the highest ranking officers told their lies. All the while exploiting Pat Tillman, even in death, for their propaganda purposes. Yet nothing happens. Congress holds more hearings, and Jessica Lynch testifies about the endless string of lies told about her battle, her capture and release rescue. The military lied, the government lied, all lies for propaganda. It seems like our government has marinated our brains in lies, yet nothing happens. No one is accountable. Well, let me tell you something. You and I should be held accountable. We allow the war, the lies, the deaths, the destruction to continue unabated. And I guess maybe it's because we don't care, because we're pretend patriots. Didn't we put a yellow ribbon and a bumper sticker on our car saying support the troops? Didn't we salute the flag when it went by at the 4th of July parade? Didn't we send some cookies or a phone card to the troops? Is that patriotism? No, in truth, we're a bunch of lily-livered cowards afraid to go fight or die like Jessica Lynch or like Pat Tillman. And we're lacking the guts and the backbone to confront Congress, the administration, or the military and say enough is enough. To tell them that if Shell, Exxon Mobil, and British Petroleum want Iraq's oil, then let them go fight for it themselves. And you here in Minnesota dare not forget that it was Vin Weber who was purported to have laundered the $30 million furnished by Mexico President Carlos Salinas to bribe enough congressmen and senators into passing NAFTA. And all of these people who voted for NAFTA and free trade still hold party power, both parties in Washington, D.C. today. Democrats Nancy Pelosi and Sonny Hoyer, Ike Skelton and Dick Durbin, and on the Republican side, the minority leaders like John Bonner and my own Senator Pat Roberts or others. Fellow Americans, please think. To cure America's ills, we must reject the diabolical divide and conquer strategy that's employed by these globalist free traders. Just think how first we're so cleverly divided, Republicans versus Democrats. Then it's men versus women, young versus old, rural versus urban, black versus white versus Latino, business versus labor. We become a nation divided of one-issue voters. Well, let me tell you, we're still all Americans. And as Americans, we're all either going to sink or swim together. Your neighbor's economic pain will be your pain someday soon. We can and we must join together again as one nation, as one people to reclaim our destiny, to take it back from the government, from the rascals and the fools, to bring back our manufacturing, our jobs, and our living wages, to restore our nation's sovereignty. We can do it if we'd all join together. I say thank you to St. Paul and God bless America again.